to the 12-Minute Talks podcast presented by Mom Life and Health Insurance Agency. Learn actionable insights from our guests in just 12 minutes. Each episode features business owners, entrepreneurs, and industry experts who share their experiences and strategies.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the 12-Minute Talks podcast. I'm excited to have with us today Fritz Spencer from Eisner Amper, where he helps startups with outsourcing as well as a fractional CFO. Fritz, thank you so much for being on today.
Thank you so much for having me. Glad to be a part of the 12-minute talks.
Well, we'll try to keep it at that. If not, it's okay. No, it is what it is, right? Um, so why don't you tell us a little bit about how you got started and what you do?
Sure. So I'm a career accountant. I started my career in public accounting. Like most people, I found my journey through there through my parents. My mom was a career accountant as well. So I went through the schooling and went through the all the way through internship process and started out as an auditor. I was auditing for about 5 years, and I've recently transitioned out of that into outsourcing for startups.
Nice. So it was kind of in the blood, like they say, right? Family.
Exactly.
Interesting. Okay, cool. I mean, it's always a stable career to be in accounting is always good. But definitely the startup space, I think, is very unique and different. Do you help specific startups, like specific niches? Tell us a little bit more about that.
Sure. We're fairly agnostic. We help out just about every type of startup. If someone is looking to be funded or is recently funded, we're happy to help them. Basically, be their financial back office. There's no one that has a full grasp on their financials as a startup. It's kind of like one of the things in the broom closet. They'll get to it eventually, but we like to be there to help them. Along the journey. And yeah, everything is really unique about startups. It changes every day. They grow, they outgrow us. We hope that they one day leave us. It's just kind of unique for a client base to hope that they will no longer be a client one day. Um, but yeah, that's the eventual goal.
So in other words, that they will no longer be a startup. Is that right? They'll be
Yeah,
more
essentially,
financially stable. Yeah, right? So
essentially,
what
yeah.
what
Normally,
what's
the
what's the next step from a startup? What do you call those?
Well, most successful startups end with what you would call an exit. So the founders exit the company and they sell it to the next group of either investors or private equity, or maybe a large corporation wants to buy them. That's normally the goal for most startups, in and out in a time frame.
Yeah, that makes total sense because yeah, that's definitely the startup mindset, I would say, right? Build something, or like they call like an MVP, right? A minimum viable product, and work on that until eventually a bigger company can take over, right? Especially in the tech space, right? I would say that's where you see it more often than say like a bakery or something, more
Right.
local, right? Yeah,
Right.
like
Yeah.
go
You would
ahead.
define those as like a traditional business, right? Like a traditional corporation or LLC. They're not what you might define as like a startup. A startup is typically solving either a new problem or an old problem in a new way. And they're developing something that is not necessarily been done by anyone else. It's typically a unique, product or service. And there's normally a lot of interest in that, and that's why these startups get, unicorns, for example, have massive exits and IPOs into the billions and billions of dollars. And that's what, most founders probably dream about. So that's the eventual long-term goal, I would say, for most startups.
Sure. So you help them go from baby steps to hopefully an exit. So like I know this week, a lot of people probably heard about that company Base 44 that had like one founder, and in 6 months he was able to exit for 80 million to Wix, right? So that's like the dream. I don't think that's reality for a lot of startups out there, right? So like how long do you normally see? Of course, it all depends, right? From being a startup to exiting or having a successful IPO.
Right. Yeah. What you talked about is definitely the exception to the rule. With like any standard deviation, there's a 1%, and that's one of those examples. The average you would probably see is around 7 to 10 years for a successful exit. And, it might be a single founder or typically a single founder with a co founder, possibly. And they might exit with, less than 20% of the original equity. But that's pretty common, and that's going to be a really big payday no matter what. So it's a successful exit. It may not be the unicorn moonshot landing that they've all dreamed for, but it's still successful.
For sure, for sure. And so tell me a little bit more about being a fractional CFO and how you help businesses there.
Yeah. So we have a lot of different titles and roles within the firm. At Eisner Amper, we're a large corporate accounting firm, around 5,000 employees and 33 offices around just the states. And so we have fractional CFOs, fractional controllers, fractional staff accountants, and I myself am like a fractional analyst. So I do the financial planning and analysis. And so fractional CFOs is like the highest level where they're really the full view of what's going on with the startup. They know how H, sorry, they know how their HR, their payroll, their accounting, and their finances all working together. And they'll be in charge of having meetings with the board, with investors, presenting information and reporting, as well as handling investing and fundraising, as well as the normal day-to-day stuff that us accountants do, like taxes and tax planning or tax mitigation, if you're lucky.
Yes, all the fun stuff people like to talk about, You definitely gave off that you were an accountant when you said, standard deviation of 1%. I'm like, no, he can't deny it. He grew up with that, he definitely knows what he's talking about. But yeah, but that's great too, especially being fractional. That means like a startup that maybe doesn't have the budget to hire a permanent CFO, or maybe they don't even have the need, right? That's where you would
Mhm.
fill in and take over that role, right?
Exactly. I mean, when you think about having a full-time CFO, it's 40 hours a week and they're a full-time employee of the company. So essentially, once we get close to that level of providing service to them for over 40 hours a week, it's typically at that time that they should look at hiring someone to replace us, which we're happy with. That means we've done our job successfully and they've grown enough to be able to afford a full-time accounting department. And so normally they'll start off with maybe 4 hours a month, 4 hours a week. That's where that fractional piece really comes from. So it's nice to be able to scale with them and to not be a huge burden based on, like set fees. Sometimes that like in legal firms, they might have minimum retainers, stuff like that. We don't have anything like that because we know that's a huge pain point for startups.
Awesome. So very geared towards that industry. And why don't we switch gears a little bit? I know you also host a podcast called Tech Talks. Tell us a little bit more about that and how you're helping startups there.
I'd love to. Thank you so much for bringing it up. Yeah, I also, as part of one of the many accounting firm perks, I host a podcast called Tech Talk, and it's very similar format to yours. Actually, we try to keep it around 12 minutes, but it rarely happens. And what we focus on is interviewing founders and investors, primarily founders, who are building something and they have it in a market. So typically it's a startup founder who's not necessarily at that idea stage. They've actually developed a product or service and they're selling it to somebody. And what we love to do is just ask them what they're building and why they're building it and what's the plan for them for the future. A lot of interesting conversations, and it's a really nice. We do it twice a month, every other Tuesday, and it's released everywhere that you listen to podcasts.
Awesome. So we'll certainly have the links down below. I like that. So it's a lot of um a, 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 a lot of alliteration. Tech Talk Tuesdays, right? It seems,
Exactly.
right?
Tech Talk Tuesdays are great.
Yeah, awesome. So how can a startup reach out to you if they would like more information about your services?
Yeah, I would say the number one way to find me is Definitely LinkedIn. I'm pretty active on LinkedIn. Fritz Spencer. You can find. I'm probably the only one there. Fritz is a pretty unique name, I'm told. But I'm also, directly via my email, which maybe we can link in the article or in the description. And those are the easiest ways, and I'm always available.
Fantastic. And like always, I will have all of those links down below so anybody listening or watching the episode can follow up with their guest. And I just wanted to quickly introduce myself for those of you that don't know who I am. I'm Lorena Tomasini, and besides being the host, I also own a mom life and health insurance agency where we help families and businesses with their financial protection needs. Fritz, it's been great having you today on the 12-Minute Talks podcast. Before I let you go, though, what would you say is some tips or maybe something that you see a pattern that you see in startup maybe they need to do sooner rather than later?
Yeah, I think one thing that is probably the largest pain point for them, in getting an understanding of is cash management. It's something that they all have a huge focus on, and they're very worried about. But without having accurate financial accounting, it's impossible to do. So when they start realizing the need to having a very accurate forecast of like their cash burn and how much they need to raise and what that looks like in milestones, that's where we come in and say, here's what you've done, here's how we get you to those milestones, and this is going to be the path in between. And giving them that clarity. The way I like to put it is they're building the car and we're building the road. We want to get them from A to B.
Awesome. I'm glad my major was in finance, so I understood most of what you said there. So awesome. Well, Fritz, thank you so much for being on today.
Absolute pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for tuning into this episode of the 12-Minute Talks podcast, presented by Mom Life and Health Insurance Agency. If you enjoyed today's conversation, remember to share and subscribe. Connect with us on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. Remember to make it a great day.